Full. Okay, and we'll have a public hearing on this, assuming we introduce tonight. There'll be more opportunity. But yeah, Ms. Krummeler?
Well, I just want to reiterate that we do have a consultant, and most of the people who have heard the consultants have been impressed, and I know I have. They know what they're doing. They've gone to other towns, and they've gone through this process, and these zoning ordinances aren't just arbitrary. They've been tried in other towns, and our consultant has recommended them.
I agree, and I also want to just correct the record that one of the first things they did was they compared what is built with what the zoning allows and finding where the big discrepancies are. So that has been part of the analysis too.
Yeah, I mean, let me just add that I was not on the committee, and I want to thank you for all the work. And I don't think it's fair to say that this wasn't thought through and that time was wasted, because this is the number one thing I hear about from people. So, Lee, I want to thank you for all the work you've done, and I know a lot of thought went into this.
I do want to just acknowledge what Marina said, and that certainly I think that's step 2 is to do something more comprehensive, and I think all of us recognize that there are big fundamental things with our zoning that we do want to take a look at, and one of the things that came up in every single one of the focus groups was this question of affordability, and there was at least interest in each of the focus groups for exploring things like duplexes. Maybe not in every single neighborhood, but in a lot of neighborhoods, they might make sense as a way to create more affordability while still preserving the streetscape that is there. And so, I think that the time is ripe for this discussion, and I think there were a lot of good points that came out, and I think actually a lot of agreement, even if that there was some disagreement about process and order.
Can I ask a question? In these focus groups, when people were complaining about the changes or the McMansions or what's going on, if you had to sort of characterize what they're unhappy about, is it that their taxes are going up because a new, bigger house is next to it? Is it the aesthetics of it? Is it because I guess, I've been thinking a lot about this since last year when we talked about this, and, we have a lot of, if it's the aesthetics, I would say we had a lot of, pretty old homes that have been here a long time that aren't particularly attractive, and we have some new homes. I mean, you can't legislate taste, I guess, and even though it's jarring when we see a small home come down and a larger home be built, they settle in after time. I mean, our colleague Patrick complained bitterly about the homes that went up on his street, and, he now is a little bit chagrined by it. He likes the people who live there, and it's all pretty nice, and they're nice neighbors, and, the plantings have grown up, and so I guess I know it's jarring, but
I mean, I'll
there's
take a
some
crack
nice
at it.
new
And
places that...
right. I'll take a crack at it, and then Jenny can add. I mean, I think there was a recognition of that, and I think that pretty much every focus group, including the residential, the one for residents, recognized that you want to have ordinances, and we want to have a town that allows people to improve their property. And one of the first slides that the consultant showed was national trends, and that if you look nationally, homes have grown. I'm going to get this statistic wrong. Something like they've increased in size 15% since 2000.
Right.
And on smaller pieces of property. And so there was a recognition that, you want to, this is private property, and that we want to encourage people to invest in their homes, and we also want to make sure that we're allowing people to use their home and change their home so that it fits their needs. But at the same time, that there needs to be a balance, and that there's a piece of your home that is also part of the community, and that there was a feeling that at least in the BCC group and in the residents group that there had become a growing disconnect on that piece of it, on the community piece, that that this sort of gift to the street was missing, that you have in some of the older homes. If you look at one of the things we haven't even spoken about tonight, although it came up in the focus groups, were things like tree removal, things like stormwater, and when somebody comes in and builds a house and it's flooding their neighbors, that's not something that should be allowed. And that, that there's these dual purposes, and that we want to have ordinances that deal with this community aspect in the least restrictive way for people's property values. And so that's what this is an attempt to do. This exercise will be an attempt to do. But certainly when you're talking about, the trees that go along the frontage of a street, that we have some community responsibility to help protect those for the people who live there now. No, I'm just saying this one example, and I would say that the having a street turn from a place where it's a street of front doors to a street of garages, I think people feel where that's been happening in their neighborhood, that also takes away from that public good. I mean, I don't know if you want to summarize it a different way.
Well, I just want to emphasize that what I hear the most is the really tall, some of the houses that are being built that just tower over. So it is the size. So there, obviously there is a disconnect between the current zoning and what's allowed, and and especially the roof lines. And so we're talking, like Liz said, about not trying to just freeze time, but even do things, just make tweaks so that the bulk and so that the larger sizes look better. So it is, I think, aesthetics.
But it doesn't seem like anything we're considering tonight really addresses that particular bulk. And, I think Marina does make a good point. What are we going to do about the people of the existing homes? I mean, we know that so many of the homes in Princeton are not, they're not conforming to the zoning, aren't they? I mean, we know that throughout the Witherspoon-Jackson. And when those people, we would like to keep those houses, but if they need to make some change, garages, cars have changed, as the mayor pointed out. I've got two-car garage. I can't fit a car in either one of them. And, if I ever wanted to change that, it'd be a huge mess, and yet you wouldn't want me not keep my house. You'd want to protect the house rather than have the whole thing torn down. So what are we going to do with people who have these existing split levels or these older homes who want to make a small, some kind of change? We're going to complicate their lives. I mean, I don't know what the answer is.
I don't think we've addressed everything that we need to. This was really viewed as we had consensus. It was a quick start. Garages were a big topic. The prevailing setback was a big topic. A lot of discussion on affordability at the focus groups. There's a concern. I didn't hear real solutions. It's one thing to say, let's allow two families. If there's a neighborhood that wants to volunteer for that doesn't have that, they haven't come forward yet. In the former borough, we allow that, and that's where they are. In the township, it only allows single-family homes. I have yet at the planning board, where we've had these applications come in, hear their neighbors say we would welcome the increased density. I think it's a solution worth discussing. I don't have an answer. I think we're going to hear more and more about that as we get more into the process, and we can talk about density, and we can talk about accessory apartments and the need for parking or not. But like it or not, we're still an automobile society, and unfortunately, these lovely, what were called, granny flats or mother-daughter apartments, we are getting more and more of those coming in where they're rental units. because the enforcement is next to impossible unless a neighbor complains and says, the mother passed away 5 years ago, it's now a rental, and they're parking in front of my house and I don't like it. They're not simple issues, and we'll try to look at them. We're not going to answer all of them. We're not going to be able to, the economics are extremely difficult. I think the amendment you were discussing for the garages may address one of the comments in terms of whether it's flush or setback from the front facade of the dwelling. In the smaller lot zones, Joe, you mentioned some of the Witherspoon Jackson homes. I share your concern. The zoning doesn't match. The zoning board doesn't hear a whole lot of applications out of that neighborhood. There's a few in a year, if that. That's also probably one of the better neighborhoods that maybe you do want to have them going to the zoning board, where you're talking,
Right.
the ordinance may require an 8-foot setback, and everybody has 5. Maybe there's a reason that we want them to go to the zoning board to allow the neighbors and everybody to come
Right,
in
to
and
weigh in.
comment,
Right.
because it's so tight there. And that's why we said, we're focusing on the half-acre and smaller, because when you have 2 acres, we don't really care about your
cares?
side yard, your rear yard, your front yard. It's not the issue. I worry about those neighborhoods if they don't have to go to the zoning board, where you're now saying, okay, we're going to make the norm 5 feet or 3 feet. Maybe you do want that to go to the zoning board so everybody can have input. I think that's one of the common themes we heard at some of the meetings and the focus groups was, why aren't we told when a developer comes in what the house is going to look like? Well, if they're complying with our rules and regulations, we don't have a lot of sway to make them change it. But people still want to comment on it. I think the zoning board doesn't want to hear people commenting on a house design that they have no legal right to tell them, make it smaller, change the design, because it's purely in aesthetics. But we're going to look at all of those things, the size. I think we're going to look at how we can better have new construction fit in better to neighborhood character. These are all small steps. Encouraging porches, the garage setback, the prevailing front setback, and then the cathedral space was a small one. I think when we heard the comment, well, what are we doing about stairs? If the stairway is 4 or 6 feet wide and it's 20 feet long, we're talking 80 feet to 120 square feet in a 4,000 square foot home. That tells you something about how people are valuing property in Princeton. Every square foot matters, because we're not talking about large numbers, but everybody is fighting for that square foot, and whether it's making the attic ceiling height 6 feet 10, so they're under the 7 feet, but that's what people are looking for. There is value both in terms of living space and in economic terms for that. So I think the discussion colors that and says, how does that impact? And it gets back to the overall size. We've heard last year and again this year the cathedral space, and can't we capture that? And that's all this is an intent to do.
So, Lee, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole because I'm excited about us moving forward on these proposals here, but you just said something interesting about granny apartments that I didn't want to lose. Were you talking about in the township? Because in my neighborhood there are, I can think of 3 within a block that seem to work really well and to provide more moderate housing options for single people. And so are you talking about the township? Because that's not in the borough.
Both communities allow a granny flat. They have different regulations as to its location and whatnot. So we do allow them. And in many cases they work well. Where they begin to fall apart is when the house, both of them have a requirement, I believe, that says the owner has to reside in one of the apartments. We've been finding, not a lot, but a few where all of a sudden the owner doesn't live there either. So now we have 2 rental units, and there's concern, well, who's managing, who's on site to make certain, whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. But we do allow them. There's a separate issue of whether you require parking for them or not. Parking is always an issue. And we're not trying to address that. I think the consultant's report will touch on that. And a lot of what his report may be is touching on a lot of issues and then saying, you need to investigate and come up with, and here, they'll frame the issue for us, and then we'll have the discussion.
Well, I would just put on the agenda for the longer-term projects, but I do think accessory apartments can play a role
Yes.
in expanding the stock of more affordable units without dramatically changing the density calculus that I think people feel so sensitive towards. But I'm sorry, I just
No,
wanted to make sure I understood
agree with
your
you,
point.
But you're talking to somebody, and Liz and Jenny sit at the planning board as well, when somebody comes in and wants to subdivide a lot, and it's the same size lot, that they're going to create 2 new lots, and they match almost exactly what's surrounding them, and people are saying, don't do that, and then to be able to say, well, but, maybe a 2-family would make more sense. I don't know if they're going to agree with that.
And I will
It's a
just, for the
discussion
record,
now.
say there's nothing wrong with duplexes, right, Lance? Nothing. Since we are both...
I love duplexes. I even live in one.
duplexes.
I love duplexes.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments on the issue of the garages once again. The garages facing the street did not appear overnight. And what we have in Princeton with garages facing the street is a result of a half a century of development in the town. And I think we have to be careful, and I appreciate the comments that were made about not wanting to look at garages when you drive down a street. I think we have to be careful about how we go about trying to solve that problem and not do it in a way that could conceivably lead us in the direction of forcing people to build houses on larger lots in order to make it possible to get at the garage from the back rather than from the street. The garages face the street for a reason. They face the street because it's easy to get to the garage, and you don't have to provide additional lot width to get to the garage. You can get there quickly. If we move in the direction of saying, don't have access to the garage from the street, you've got to go around to the back of the house in order to get to the garage, we're really saying to people, get a larger lot so that you can have a driveway that goes around the house in order to access the garages. And that is going to push us in a direction where I don't think we want to go. It's going to move away from affordability. It's going to move away from moving in the direction of houses that are not large houses. And I think we need to be very careful
Bernie,
about what we do.
can I just add to that? I think, and Liz, you mentioned this too, that the more driveway, the less, permeable surface there is. So, so if you have a driveway that goes around to the back of the house, the longer the driveway, I think you increase the chance of flooding for your neighbors. So it does have a downside.
Ms. Kroll?
Do you want to? I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I'd like to move the ordinances, but I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
we're
just want
finished.
to go over the changes. So one was taking out block and putting in a more specific
You want me to
definition
read
there?
what I had?
Yes, please.
I had in section 2, for porches, we would amend in the second line where it says the porch does not exceed 200 square feet, and the majority of the structures within 500 feet in either direction of the lot have roof porches that encroach on the front setback area. So rather than saying block, we're saying the 500 feet. And then also in section 2, under number 2 for garages,
Can you just make sure you're in the mic for this to help out?
Also in section 2, number 2 for garages, it would now read, all new front entry garages shall be flush or set back from the front facade of the dwelling. So we're no longer requiring 6 feet. And that's in keeping with a lot of the character, I think, when you look at the exhibit that was submitted, that they're almost all flush.
Right.
What about the third point that was raised, Mr. Carney?
Multi-story porch?
Yeah, that limiting porches to 1 story.
It already does.
It does. It says, if you read the second sentence under porches, porches which encroached into the front setback may not have a second floor balcony deck or be enclosed on all sides.
Okay, great.
It was a great idea.
Okay, so it's been moved by Ms. Krummeller with the changes, seconded by Ms. Howard.
Just, could I ask a process question to the attorney? So we had one ordinance or in the packet, are we going to, we're introducing something different, correct?
Correct. And then the version that will then be put forward for the public hearing will be the version with the changes.
Those two changes.
That were discussed tonight.
And are you going to be able to capture that in the minutes? I'm just not sure we're doing this right, but we can talk about it on another night. I feel like we probably ought to introduce what we put forward in the agenda packet and then amend it if we want to amend it.
But then you have to reintroduce if you've amended. I mean, by statute, you can actually introduce an ordinance by title only with none of the text. It's for the public hearing that you have to have the text.
All right.
So
we'll be able to have the amended language in the public
and
hearing.
it will be on the website.
So we're
sent
actually
to the planning board.
introducing the amended,
Exactly.
Is the better way. Thanks.
And remember, just for your comfort, that it's going to the planning board also, before it comes back.
Right. Do we have the date for that, the planning board? Is that December 1st?
I forget, I think it's the 8th,
December 8th, okay.
the December 8th planning board meeting, and then it comes back here.
I have that written down. That is going to be December 19th, 2016. Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Crum-Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler? Motion carries.
Okay, the ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing for the ordinance will be on December 19th, 2016. And for those who would also like to come to the planning board meeting, it will be heard by the planning board for their review on December 8th.